voor vrijgemaakte slaven en idealistische blanken, dat door Amerika werd bedacht en gesticht, is na 1,5 eeuw vastgelopen in een totale anarchie. Krijgsheren betwisten elkaar sinds jaren de macht in een steeds bloediger, uitzichtlozer en surrealistischer oorlog. Sommigen, die de nachtmerrie wisten te ontkomen, gingen terug naar Amerika, dat de voorvaderen juist hadden verlaten in de hoop er nooit weer terug te keren. Liberia, een verloren belofte.
This tape is called Ancestral Call. Ancestral Call. There we go, Greenwood, 29 miles. Look at that sunset. Yeah. One thing about America, there's so much land. But one thing you got to think about, Uncle Daniel, as you drive through this area, your forefathers could have been walking this land, you know.
Yeah.
The Talbots of South Carolina, the slave-owning Talbots had they had over 10,000 acres of land. And I met somebody who said that if you got on your horse and rode for half a day, you wouldn't come to the end of Talbot land. In 1879, my great-grandfather, Daniel Frank Talbot, who was 29 years old at the time, along with his father, who was William Richard Talbot, right?
Yeah.
They had heard about the American Colonization Society, which had started this homeland for blacks in Africa called Liberia. And they actually formed a corporation called the Liberian Exodus Association. Right in Charleston, they said that over 5,000 blacks from this area gathered, read the Liberian Declaration of Independence, sang the national anthem of Liberia. And that's how strong the whole spirit was of going back to Africa at that time. They actually read the Liberian Declaration of Independence before this crowd of 5,000 people. There was a set of Talbots, the white Talbots, who had caused a riot in the area we're going to. The whites in the area were incensed because the white Talbots were living in the same homes as blacks. I mean, that was for the 1800s quite more than radical. It was revolutionary almost. Two whole lines of Talbot graves here, that any one of these, Uncle Daniel, could be connected to us directly too, because you know that your grandfather had white blood in him, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We know that. There's an interesting gravestone here for this. JRT stands for John Robert Talbot, Thomas P. Talbot. I think there's one that even has a Daniel Talbot gravestone here somewhere, just like your name. This is sacred in the memory of Nancy Talbot, who was born in the year 1764, coming from Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
Right in front of this church is a spot where there was a major race riot in the late 1800s,
because the white Talbots insisted that the blacks who lived in this area should have the right to vote. And they put out a ballot box for the blacks to vote in, and some of the whites around here didn't like it. Rode up, and there was a shootout, and some of the white Talbots were wounded. They were chased out of the county, and the blacks were actually lynched. I read that. There's a newspaper article I read in the New York Times from 1800s. Right in front of this church, about a dozen blacks were lynched as a result of this race riot.
I used to visit here as a student in the early 60s. And then after I left and joined the UN Secretariat, whenever I came to Washington, I came to visit this embassy where many of my friends were. And also all of the new ambassadors from Africa who used to come to Washington for the first assignment. It was here they used to come because they did not know the protocol nor the social habits. So here they used to come to talk to the Liberian ambassador to learn what it was like. So this was a proud symbol of Liberia and of the new emerging Africa in this capital. Today now it is the home of the derelicts, of the homeless people. Here where they are sleeping, you see their bed. They have broken the blocks to get inside from the so this is what is left. This is a reflection of the mentality of the people who made the destruction in Liberia. They reached it all the way to America to destroy this wonderful symbol.
I've been back here since 1980. Actually 16 years, since September 1980, 6 months after the coup d'etat in Liberia. I came back over here with my family. And I've actually been working in the same institution since I've been here.
And are you earning a living as a?
I'm an international banker. This is a photo of my grandfather, William Richard Talbot. He was actually born in South Carolina in 1869. And he emigrated to Liberia in 1878 with his father and my grandmother. And this is my father, age about 5 or 6. I think this picture must have been taken around 1913 or 1914 because this is the late President Talbot as a baby sitting on his mother's lap. And he was born in 1913. My father was born in 1910. And what the family history has, the oral family history that we know of, was that, first of all, he bought his own way to Liberia on this ship, which in fact was purchased by a group of African Americans or black Americans. They formed a company called the Liberian Exodus Company in South Carolina, and several thousand of them actually raised $5 and $10 contributions to form this company, and they purchased a vessel called the Azor, and this was going to be the vessel that would be taking them back to Liberia in groups. And he was on the first group of 230 immigrants that went back to Liberia.
There were forces behind the reason why they would leave America. Firstly, the growing number of free black men were seen as a threat by the slaveholders in the South. They thought that with this number growing, it would give an incentive to the slaves to begin to revolt or to rebel. And there were several attempts. One of the most famous is the Nat Turner Rebellion. So this would be very much on the mind of the slaveholders. Then, of course, we must not forget Haiti as another example. Now, in the North, at the same time, America was beginning to industrialize. And during this period, parallelly, the immigration from Europe began to pick up. So in the North, the growing number of free black would be in competition with the coming immigration from Europe. So therefore, the white establishment in the North also wanted these people to leave. And then there was an ideological reason why they wanted them to leave. And the best spokesman for this ideological reason was Thomas Jefferson, who, to paraphrase him, said that even though he did not believe in slavery, and it was not morally right for some people to be held as slaves while others as masters, but he saw no possibility in his time or in the future where the two races could live in harmony and inequality in America. So it was better to remove them, the African that is, to take them back to the home of their ancestors. So Liberia is certainly an American invention. The settlers brought their experience and their conception of civilization to the shores of Africa. So certainly there were going to be a clash of cultures. Some of the settlers began to write back home to their friends, giving their experience and their observation. And briefly, let me read a letter, part of a letter. Our passage was longer than we expected. He means traveling from America to what would become Liberia, though very safe. And I'm very well pleased. My reason why is I can use my own privileges in every respect. There are a few white people out here, though they are very polite. I meet them sometimes in the streets, and they step one side of the pavements and touch their hats. These houses are a reflection of how they remember what the houses of the masters looked like before they came to Liberia. And these houses belong to successful farmers, because the people who would go up the St. Paul River to the different settlements, such as Clay Ashland, or New Georgia, or Bensonville, where the Talbots come from, they were building this kind of house mainly from corrugated zinc and high pillars, from memory, from where they have come. Tubman was in power for approximately 27 years, from 1944 to 1971, his death. Tubman was America's favorite because when Tubman came to power, he was determined to stay in power. And to do this, he discovered that he had to do what the Americans wanted. So now, American businesses were coming in, American money was coming in, and later on, Liberia under Tubman would become of strategic interest for America's interest in all of West Africa. Now, Tubman was just the reverse. He began to loosen up quickly the control that Tubman had imposed upon Liberia. And for that, he had to pay with his life.
What happened to the people on the picture?
Well, obviously the president was assassinated in the coup d'etat. My Uncle Stephen died in a rather mysterious plane crash in 1975. And my own father was executed in 1980, some 10 days after the coup. I was in hiding, and I watched it on television as he was executed on April 22nd, 1980. No doubt in my mind that 1980 was not only for us, but for the whole country, sort of a beginning of an end.
Regime. ELTV coming to you Tuesday, April 22, 1980. Master Sergeant Joe is seen accompanied by young army officers walking along the ocean, going rather back to the execution ground. We have the Speaker of the People's Redemption Council, Nicholas Pode Jr., who is also at the execution grounds, and he has these few remarks to make.
It is my pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, that these people, we get rid of them because they have kept our country down for so long time, and we feel that if we keep these people alive, it will be a threat to the nation. And we want to wipe out corruption, and so we are not going to forgive them, and we have to execute them, and I'm happy that the execution is going on now.
Officers, they call them the firing squad, and they are now seen about to take up their positions shortly before the commands, orders are given for the execution of the former officials of the Talbot government. There you see them again. They are C. Cecil Bennett, D. Franklin Neal, Frank Emmanuel Talbot, James T. Phillips, E. Reginald Townsend, Joseph J.F. Chilson, Richard A. Henrys, James A. Peart, and Frank Stewart. They command. April 22, 1980.
It's a good pizza, you know?
Yeah?
Yeah, very nice. You know, my grandfather used to be a warrior. Up to this time, my grandmother is a country doctor. Yeah, you know, like people go there to her if they have problems. You know, and sometimes up to this time, the president of Liberia used to pay her, you know, because she used to work for the late president, Cummings. They call him President Cummings. That from.
What did she do for the President Cummings?
It's like protecting the president, you know. But she tell the president, whoever against the president, you know, who want to overthrow the president.
Your grandmother?
What's going to happen?
Told that to President Cummings?
Yeah. So my grandmother worked for President Cummings, and he worked for Talbot.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Doing what?
The same thing. Before Talbot died. Before Talbot died, he told Talbot before he died. Yeah.
What?
He told Talbot that he was going to die in the year that he died. They told Talbot that the coup that coming was not going to make him. And no matter where he go, they're still going to get him.
Yeah, she told him that?
Yeah.
And what did he say?
He didn't have no choice, so he told my grandmother what he can do to survive. So my grandmother told him to leave the country and go somewhere in Europe. But he didn't go until he died.
My father, in the last months of his life, said to me frankly that his brother would get all of us killed. I personally had no question that the president could have been assassinated at any minute. And I believe strongly that my uncle also knew that. I mean, we discussed this in family, and I think he fully expected it could happen to him. He was prepared for that. What I don't think any of us were prepared for was that the whole social order of the country, as it were, would be overturned. And I think this is, that was the great surprise.
Each time if they want a new president, Liberian people never call any election. They never have no election. What they do is just call a coup. Maybe you'll be sleeping in your house 1 or 2 o'clock. Everybody, you know, surround your building. And sometimes they ask to kill you, you know, automatically. That's how they overthrow president, mostly in most of the African countries. You know, it's very hard. They don't call election. Because if there is election, you can select which you want to be a president. But their government policy does not do no election. They just take immediately reaction. You know, like, for example, one of the ministers, you know, might plan a coup and pay a few people, pay the security to the president, you know, and say, listen, man, this is what I got for you. I want to take care of the president this morning, 2 o'clock. You know, and sometimes everything is done.
The political structure that at which Tolbert was the apex was not a viable one. You couldn't have 5% of the population of Liberia hold the other 95% of the population in political servitude indefinitely. Things were bound to change, and Tolbert recognized this, and he was making an effort to bring the indigenous people into the political life of the country, to a lesser extent into the economic life. But he was doing it in a very measured fashion, and even at that slow rate, encountering a great deal of opposition from arch conservatives within the Americo-Liberian community, who felt that any opening to the indigenous population was a hole in the dike in terms of their privileged position.
So it explains a coup d'etat.
Yeah, and as far as the DOE represented the non-commissioned officers within the military, they were living in filth and misery alongside Americo-Liberians who were living a very privileged existence. And it's not at all surprising that they decided to take their future into their own hands and to seize by force some of what they felt belonged to them.
One can't deny the historical origins of social problems in the country, in the sense of the differences between those who emigrated to the country and those who were there in the country. There were undoubtedly divisions that were still felt even up until the 70s and the 80s. Many of us in the younger generation, such as myself, really perhaps were blind to those divisions because we didn't perceive fellow Liberians in that light. I certainly didn't look at other Liberians in terms of Americo-Liberian or this tribe or that tribe. I looked at people more in terms of their qualifications and and what they could do. But that is obviously a factor. But to me, that is a factor that was blown out of all proportions and used as a pretext really to create greater divisions in the society than there should have been.
We know that what he have done has never happened before in the history of Liberia, but it was most necessary.
Along about 7 in the morning or 8, early in the morning, they stopped the military music on the radio and announced that Sergeant Samuel Canyon Doe was the new president of Liberia. So we reported this, and about 10 o'clock there was another break in the music, and the announcer said that Sergeant Doe wanted to see the Russian ambassador and the American ambassador. We were face to face, and Doe began talking. He was terribly agitated, terribly excited. And the thrust of what he was saying was that he wanted assistance from the United States. And I told him that I would be glad to relay his request to my government, but that he should be aware that the U.S. government does not like to help heads of state or governments that mistreat their people. I understand people are being killed. I told him that. And I felt that that would have to stop before the United States government would be interested in anything, but that I would certainly relay the request. The conversation lasted not too long, but this was the gist of it. Now, before I'd left the embassy, I had told Washington on the open telephone line that Doe had called for me to come, and I asked if they had any message for me to give them. Well, you have to realize that although this was about 10 o'clock in the morning in Liberia on Saturday, it was about 6 or 5 o'clock in the morning, or maybe 4, here in Washington. And the fellow to whom I was speaking, an old friend, scouted around for a bit and came back and said, "Julius, I'm sorry, there's no one here to give you guidance at this point. You're going to have to wing it." That's exactly what he said, and I said, "All right, I'll wing it." And that actually set the policy for our early contacts with Sergeant Doe.
Talbot came to the conclusion that this faithful serving of U.S. policy had not been equally recognized and rewarded by the U.S. So to change for the first time in our history the direction of our foreign policy, he took certain measures. Number one, he became more non-aligned. He became a big spokesman for the non-aligned. Then he, in his diplomatic relations, he broke with Israel and invited the Arabs to come in. But with the U.S. in particular, he refused to grant the U.S. requests to use Roberts Field, our international field, as an exit that would give U.S. access to whatever clandestine operation she was supporting in Africa.
Liberia became truly more independent in its foreign policy. We were very much more involved in the whole Pan-African movement, as we should have been. And I think it was right that we were so. Whether other people took that as distancing ourselves from our traditional friends or not is another matter.
There was no reason why the Americans wanted to get rid of the Talbot family?
No. Absolutely none. No. No. We had no interest in getting rid of Mr. Talbot. That would have been a matter for the Liberians. If they wanted to change him, that was their business. It certainly was not ours. We had very good and very close relations with Mr. Talbot.
The coup took not only President Tolbert by surprise, but took the American government equally by surprise.
There was no way that the Americans knew about the coup?
No. No, it was a very unpleasant surprise in Washington as it was in Monrovia.
The American presence in Liberia up until that time saturated the country, covered the whole country. So if a coup was being planned, unless their heads were in the sand as ostrich, they had to know something was happening. To me, that's a logical, deduction to make.
Think about it. If the United States was interested in staging a coup against Tolbert, would they have chosen Doe? There were lots of relatively capable Liberians with military training and in the military establishment with whom one would have been able to work much more easily than working with a semi-literate sergeant that no one knew anyway.
Bill Casey, the very well-known CIA director for the Reagan years, became obsessed to overthrow Gaddafi. And so after the coup, they would quickly begin to cultivate Doe and develop Doe, so that Doe would grant them what Talbot denied them, which was the right to use Liberia in the worldwide strategy and network to overthrow Gaddafi.
There was deliberation, and a great deal of deliberation, about what should be done about supporting Doe. The consensus finally was that maybe we can influence this fella. Maybe we can work with him. And Lord only knows what we may get after him. It's a case of the devil you know is usually not as bad as the one you don't know.
Well, it would appear that when Doe visited the United States after he made the coup, that he got certain assurances that no matter what, as long as he made it possible to serve America's interests, he would be secured.
We were able in the first months to have a good bit of influence by giving him assistance. I think the influence began to drop off. Doe's attitude began to change. One of the first things he said to me in that first conversation was that he did not intend to stay in power a long time, that he intended to turn the government over to civilian rule. And I reminded him of this several times when we spoke. But he went farther and farther away from it, just as when he came into the job, he was a very thin, wiry individual. And the longer he was there, the larger and the sleeker and the bigger he became. He changed, mentally and physically.
As Doe became more and more paranoia about being overthrown or people making plots against him, and he withdrew more and more to his tribe, the more and more he adopted cruelty as an official process or method to keep the people in line. But then this only led to the multiplication of people's determination, because the excessives of the cruelty of Doe and his soldiers just galvanized the hatred of the Gio and the Mano people against the Crown people, which Doe came from. So in this kind of environment, even if anybody had come with a flag and say, "Follow me, I will help to smash your enemy," they would have followed them. And just at this time, Charles Taylor arrives.
Yeah, I was one of the fighters. You know, at that time I was in a rebel group fighting against the president, fighting against the president. Yeah, fighting against the government. You know, President Samuel Doe. My father came from the government tribe, and my mother came from the rebel tribes. And what happened is, my other brothers fighting for the government tribes, and my other brothers are fighting for the rebel tribes. And this is very difficult, you know. So no matter what you do, you gotta lose somebody, you know, because you might kill your own brother, you don't know, you know.
You fought for both.
You're fighting for both of them. And you don't have to know, you don't have to let them know what you're doing. Because I go for, you know, I go for undercover. You know, like speak other tribe, get information from them. Speak the other tribe, get information from them. You know, that make me more survives. You know, sometimes I go to Prince Johnson group and say, "Listen, man, the Crown people want to kill me. It's not easy." And sometimes the Crown people send me, you know, and then so I can find their base, where they keep their guns, wherever they do.
So you just went back and forth?
Back and forth.
You weren't in favor of any of the...
I was not in favor because everybody is Liberian, you know. that's what in the back of my mind already. Whoever I kill Liberian, and I know it's not worth it. But if I have to kill somebody to survive, I will. In 1989, I joined the rebel troop because there was nowhere for me to go. There was no food. There was nothing. And now, since they got up, they said that you got to join. Sometimes if you don't join, they kill you. That's how I take the arm. And the leader of the rebel troop, Charles Taylor, you know, he go around, pick up some kids, you know, tell them that he bringing U.S. dollars in the country, and everybody going to get paid, and everybody going to get a position when he take over. I liked him from the beginning when he came to the country. You know, my father died during the war. You know, my mother and the kids and my grandmother, they run away into a mountain. They go to a mountain, all the way in a village where there is no light. You can't find nobody but animals and trees. That's where they go because my grandmother, you know, she's a person that, you know, she got certain things that she put on you, and then no enemies can see you. You can see them. You can see them talking. They might hear you talking, but they don't see you.
Your grandmother does that?
Yeah. Only you can see them. But they can only hear you talking, but they can't see you. You know? I was trying to stay there and survive with them, but they told me to go back in the city. That way, we'll be able to know, you know, that way I will tell the other family where they at. But if I stay with them, nobody will know where they at. So I have to come back to the city, you know, hold weapons for some time, you know.
My name is Tony Marley. I'm a retired military officer. At the time I was in Liberia, I was a major in the United States Army and was serving as the military attaché at the United States Embassy in Monrovia.
Right. What period?
I was there from October 1988 until January 1991.
By this time, Taylor had placed a siege on Monrovia from the east or the west. No enter, no exit. But the Americans had contacted Taylor and had pled with Taylor to hold off invading the city because there would be too much destruction, and they in turn would make it possible for Doe to leave. Apparently, they could not persuade Doe.
I think there was an expectation, certainly by April of 1990, that the Doe government was probably going to fall. They were going to lose the war. And I think there was also an expectation that Charles Taylor's regime, whatever it was going to look like, would probably not be worse than the Doe government.
By this time, Taylor had decided to send one of his trusted commander, who came from the tribe that Doe had persecuted, with a large number of troops to control the entrance from the dock. So it was this commander called Prince Johnson. By this time, according to some source, he broke away from Taylor, and he was influenced to do this by foreign power. They supplied him uniform, they supplied him guns for his men, everything. And now how he manages to cross from the island to the mainland of Monrovia when Doe had the two bridges covered by his machine guns, it's still a question to us.
One of the Liberian traits is that they don't accept responsibility for any of their actions. Nothing bad happens because of poor planning or because of mistakes on their part or because they did something stupid. Johnson's people didn't appear in Monrovia because the armed forces of Liberia failed to have security posted along this railway line into the city. Everything has to be because someone is conspiring against them in a political or a personal way. So again, the allegations constantly have been that the only way Johnson must have gotten there is with American help, never did the Liberians acknowledge that they failed to take proper military security procedures and defend all the different ways into the city.
And there is no doubt in your mind that the Americans didn't help him?
There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that the Americans did not help Johnson come into Monrovia or in any other way during the Civil War.
Charles Taylor and Prince Johnson disparted. I stayed with Prince Johnson. Prince Johnson is true. Prince Johnson was not having a lot of men. He was not even having weapons. Charles Taylor was the one that having all these weapons. Johnson was using a rifle, you know, because he was not having enough machine guns. You know, but later on, Johnson was having all the guns. I guess the U.S. gave Johnson the weapons.
Commandos, he was dressed in a camouflage for very new boots.
Prince Johnson, he was a fascinating individual. It became readily apparent when you met him that the man was somewhat unstable. He was rather all-powerful within the small part of territory that he controlled. I mean, he literally exercised the power of life and death over various people, and he killed a lot of people in cold blood. But he also would fund the orphanages and got a school reestablished in his territory. Not exactly the role model that you would want for those kids, but for a short period of time, he and his group were the only ones that had something like that underway.
Field Marshal Prince Johnson is now going to the military barracks to meet with Doe for peace, to stop the war like he said he was going to do. Okay, now they're doing the introduction, shaking hands. We are with Doe military people. This is like a setup. This is like a setup. He trying to tell that he don't want no more war, that he only want to, you know, make peace with Doe, so that he and Doe will fight against Taylor.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Wait. Okay. Peace. A victory.
That happened to be here.
Yeah. How are you, sir? Good. I always talk. Look.
Everybody else here more than happy. We say the occasion is open. You are welcome at Brigade Headquarters. We need your hand, you are secure. Be free. Be free. It's your own home. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, members of the Defense Staff, military barracks, members of the freedom fighters, I'm very happy to be here in this office to meet the President of Liberia so that we can together talk.
That's a big setup. Now, the President of Liberia, President Doe, agreed to the peace making, you know, but to my belief, there was going to be no peace.
It is not too late to make peace. And one thing I want to tell you, I want to be sincere. I put my signature on the paper to you. If anything happens to you, I'm responsible. The outside world will hold me responsible. So do not be afraid.
Johnson always tell me that guards would kill Doe.
Responsible. If anything happens to you, the outside world will hold me responsible. So don't be afraid.
Prince Johnson is trying to get Doe out of the barrack to go to the free port so that Doe will be captured.
On Sunday morning, we heard, those of us at the embassy compound, what sounded like a presidential convoy. It was the sirens and all that were associated only with the movement of the president. I can remember commenting with whoever I was with, that, you know, that sounds like a presidential convoy, but that doesn't make sense. Where would Doe be going? Because by that point in time, his faction, the Armed Forces of Liberia, and President Doe controlled only a few square blocks of Monrovia.
President Doe, yeah, he's down there. He has been caught. Doe has been caught. Can't see Doe. Can't see Doe. Can't see Doe. Ladies and gentlemen, I tell you, we arrested Doe in a very cool and intelligent manner as commandos.
I was there when they captured Doe. They arrested him, you know.
Well, what did he say then?
He was saying that, you know, I thought we came for peace. You know, we need peace. And he's saying to Jeroy, one of this, you know, one of the head man for President Johnson, he said, yeah, Jeroy, you remember when I took you off from jail? You know, and he was saying some sorry thing, you know, so that they can let him go. But at that time, it was too late. You know, all his men was disarmed, you know, and President Johnson man was in control. A special belt that he wore sometimes for protection and stuff like that, you know, and everybody think that Doe couldn't get shot, couldn't die. You know, most people have that kind of belief. But it's like in Africa, the traditional is like whenever you are strong or you have powers, it's always somebody that is more stronger than you. So let's say you might have a little bit of protection, but it's somebody that has more powerful protection than you do. See, that's what, you know, it's mostly the powers, it's about the power in Liberia, you know. Mostly war, which is true, you know. I've seen people doing a lot of crazy stuff, you know. That's why the president of Liberia was slaughtered, cut his head, cut his penning up, because people believed that he couldn't die. See, that's why, you know, they did that killing. Right. That's why they did that killing. You know, they thought that he was going to disappear among the crew. You know, they thought that he was going to disappear. You know.
Who said that?
President Johnson. You know, he thought that Doe was going to disappear. You know, because
after he captured him.
Yeah, after he captured him. So they made.
I do not need to dive into 1847 because whatever